don't want to do. I would like to milk into a hand that has a potential to turn 2 maybe.
Right. And I think barring disruption, Elves is a pretty solid turn 3 deck. And in game 1, they really have no way to interact in the mirror match. So even if you know that your opponent's on Elves and they snap keep their hand and you have a turn 3 hand, it's like your hand isn't really going to get much better than that. So you just kind of have to hope that they either fizzle or are a few points short of actually killing you with Crater Hoof.
There are some turn 2s in the deck, but they're pretty hard to put together. Hayden's on the play, though, so that's a pretty big advantage for him. He does have one of the best starts in the deck on top of that. The turn 1 Deathrite Shaman is probably the ideal turn 1 play here. Getting up to 3 mana gives you the greatest chance of having a fast combo.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you definitely want to start with a mana accelerator when playing this deck, and as far as mana accelerators go, Deathrite Shaman is arguably the best one, if not the most powerful one. You can run into some awkwardness where both players have a Deathrite Shaman and you go to make a mana with it, and in response they activate their Deathrite Shaman targeting the land that you targeted, and things can get kind of weird there.
Yeah, and we might see that James copies the opening with a fetch land of his own into Deathrite Shaman, so we may see some mana denial tactics with these Deathrites, as you mentioned. Remember, his ability is not a mana ability, like by the rules, not a mana ability because it targets, which means it does use the stack, unlike, say, Land War Elves. So it means when you try to make mana, I can respond. I can exile the land and stop you from making mana.
Right.
We see here Hayden, he's going to ramp into a 3 mana spell. That's a green sun for 2. He's going to get Elvish Visionary here. And with 2 elves in play, with the right hand, Hayden can go to the races next turn. You know, he can, if he starts the turn with Glimpse into Heritage Druid, there's no telling how many cards he could draw.
Yeah, it's really tough to fizzle once you start going off with Glimpse of Nature, but it is worth noting that by adding this natural order package alongside 2 Crater Hoof Behemoths and sometimes like another different creature like a Rurik Thar sometimes, you could actually fizzle. It is more likely that you fizzle, but in return, you do have that natural order package.
Yeah. And yeah, I do think that there is a lot, like, the construction of older elf decks was that in order to make sure your Glimpse combos worked, you did stuff like you'd play the minimum number of lands, you'd try to make as many 1-mana elves in your deck as possible. There were a lot of things you had to do to try to make sure those Glimpses didn't fizzle, and there are a lot of bricks now in the deck.
We do see James going off with a mini Glimpse.
Yeah, and that's actually how you see Glimpse used now in the deck, really.
Yeah,
it's more of a draw 3 than a combo card.
Yeah, I mean, you just use it to get enough resources in play to where Crater Hoof is always lethal, right? And then if you do have that combo draw where you get to keep going, okay, that's cool, but that wasn't really what you were expecting.
And James may have a turn 2 here. We're going to go ahead with what's happened here. He started out by playing Glimpse of Nature, then he used the Deathrite Shaman mana to play Quirion Ranger. Quirion made a mana, bounced a land and untap, so he had another mana, and then he drew 2 more cards here, which were Nettle Sentinel and Birchlore Rangers. We cast both those to draw cards. So now he has the combination that every time he casts an elf, he can basically make a mana by untapping the Nettle Sentinel. He won't net any mana yet, but if he can continue to chain 1-mana elves into play and maybe get another Nettle Sentinel and a Heritage Druid, he can go combo, full combo here. So we see another Glimpse cast, and now the Quirion taps to do that. And now he plays Wirewood Symbiote. Now he's drawing 2 cards off each elf. I am wondering if we're seeing a turn 2 happen here. Wirewood Symbiote is going to bounce the Quirion. It's going to, untap another elf, so now he can make that. Now he has 2 Nettle Sentinels, so now he could start netting mana. Now he has to untap 2 Nettles each time. Right now he has no mana floating, but he's drawing 2 cards. I think we see a turn 2 kill here. At this point, it's looking like one.
Yeah, things can get kind of dicey, though, because while you can put a bunch of things in play and cast Crater Hoof Behemoth, you only have 1 creature that can attack this turn.
Yeah, and that's the Deathrite Shaman.
Right. So you have to get that thing big enough where it can trample over the Elvish Visionary and still deal enough damage to kill Hayden. Yeah, so alongside the Crater Hoof Behemoth.
So what he's doing here is every time he's casting an elf, he is he's untapping his 2 Nettle Sentinels, and then they tap again to make a green mana to cast the next elf. Where he's netting mana is the elves he's casting are all coming to play untapped, and for every 2 elves he makes, he can tap them again to the Birchlore ability. You see now he's making a couple Elvish Visionaries, making sure he draws some cards. Now he's going to Green Sun on 1, untapping, and I think this is going to be for Heritage Druid.
And there it is.
There we go. He does not get to draw a card off that one because he's ENIF'd for it. But now he will start netting mana. Every time he plays a green spell, he will get 3 mana. Or if he plays a creature spell.
Right.
And so now we have 3 green mana, untaps 2 Nettle Sentinels, and now it's a 3rd Nettle Sentinel. So now he's actually just making 3 green every time he casts a green spell. So the majority of his deck is free at this point.
So we were talking earlier about how a lot of the Maverick players may have moved on to play Elves instead. Because, it's kind of in the same range as a fair deck like Maverick,
Maverick
right?
doesn't do this.
Yeah, but Maverick does not kill people on turn 2.
And I think this is what we've seen. So ideally what he's going to try to do here is there's only 1 point of toughness on Hayden's side. If he can get 21 creatures in play, he can cast Craterhoof Behemoth and then use a Quirion or Wirewood Symbiote to untap his Deathrite, and then he can have a 21 power trampling Deathrite Shaman swing for lethal. Which, it's like, oh yeah, all he has to do is first he has to get 20 creatures into play. Okay, no big, right? We'll get there. Here is Craterhoof Behemoth.
And there's 12 creatures.
It's not enough, so maybe we'll have to go get another Craterhoof.
Well, between the hoof itself and the Deathrite Shaman, you have 2 lethal attackers, right?
So you have 2 creatures getting +12/+12 and trample. So you have 30 trampling damage on turn 2. James Hess 1-0 up on Hayden Bedsole.
Being able to break serve in the Elves mirror match is pretty important.
Yeah, I mean, so that's what I was saying before, is like when you're on the draw here, I'm pretty confident that Hayden would win the next turn. Like on turn, Elves is a pretty consistent turn 3.
Right.
So when you're on the draw, you need to keep something with the potential of a turn 2. And I don't think James, probably was not in the bank when he started. He started with, it was maybe I can full combo, maybe this is a mini glimpse. We'll draw some cards and see which one we have.
Yeah, I mean, James has 2 Birchlore Rangers and 3 Heritage Druids, so you see players making changes like this. They're moving more away from the combo aspect, and like you said, they're using Glimpse of Nature just as an ancestral, basically, just enough to get enough resources in play. But sometimes, you keep the Heritage Druids in the deck for draws like that.
Yeah, for example, Hayden's deck, he is just not playing Birchlore Rangers anymore. And that actually is going to hurt him a fair amount because, so while Birchlore Rangers in a lot of situations is a bad Heritage Druid, it doesn't make as much mana. If you were talking about the times where Elves turn 2 kills people,
a lot of times,
they almost all involve Birchlore Rangers. Right. You can't start by tapping 3 creatures. You just don't have enough mana to do that. What you do is you start exactly what James did. You start with the Birchlore plus Nettle Sentinel, and then eventually you upgrade to Heritage plus Nettle.
Right.
And yeah, so I would say game 2, Hayden's on the play, and he can turn 3, and that'll be fine. But game 3, he's going to need to pull something out here because I don't really think he's going to be able to turn 2.
Well, I mean, that possibility certainly exists. It is just very slim, I think.
Yeah.
But now, it looks like both players get access to things like Cabal Therapy and Thoughtseize post-sideboard. So you can use those cards to break serve against your opponent. So now the dynamic of the matchup changes significantly.
Yeah, so both players have access to 6 or 7 1-mana discard spells. They also have access to a trio of Abrupt Decays on both sides. And even a Scavenging Ooze. Are they comboing each other here post-board, or are they just going to tear each other's hands apart and then start attacking?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because you have some removal spells, and you can kill the important things that matter, but there are really a lot of important things depending on where the game is going. If you've kind of stabilized the board and they have a Deathrite Shaman, they can kind of use that to finish the game off. If you're trying to be aggressive and they have a Wirewood Symbiote, that means that they can continually block and bounce a creature, potentially an Elvish Visionary, so maybe you have to point Abrupt Decay at that. If they're going off, you want to point Abrupt Decay probably at the Heritage Druid. So
Abrupt Decay to me still feels expensive in this matchup.
It is.
If I'm an Elf player, I want to tap my mana on my turn because I always have so many good things to do with it. Leaving up Abrupt Decay just seems like a huge investment.
Yeah, and most of the time you're spending 2 mana on Abrupt Decay to kill their 1 mana investment, and while the elves don't have haste, a lot of the abilities like Heritage Druid, Birch Lore Ranger, Wirewood Symbiote, even Quirion Ranger can be used the turn they come into play. So it's like they've almost certainly played their card, gotten some use out of it, and now you're using Abrupt Decay to kill it and at a mana disadvantage. That might not be where you want to be.
Yeah, there's very few creatures actually worth Abrupt Decaying in the matchup. Like maybe Symbiote is worth it, but yeah. So I imagine we'll see the 1 mana discard. I don't think I'd be boarding in Abrupt Decay here. I think I still just want to try to combo my opponent.
Right. Can you do that through a bunch of Thoughtseize and Cabal therapies? I'm not sure.
Right, and that's the interesting question, right? So rather than having the Glimpse combo, would you rather just have, is it going to, like, if the Glimpse combos don't work due to Thoughtseize and therapies, then the game's going to come down to Symbiote Visionaries and Natural Orders.
Right. And I do think that you're right that Glimpse is not going to combo kill anyone, but I do still think it is good as a draw 3.
Yeah, I mean, if you're still doing an attrition fight, Glimpse is the best card drawer in the deck.
Yeah, I mean, it helps you recover from something like a Thoughtseize or a Cabal Therapy if you draw it off the top. But so say you're in James's spot, and Hayden's on a mulligan to 6 so far. Do you feel like Hayden's mulliganing aggressively? If you side in Cabal Therapy in James's spot, what do you name on turn 1? Are you super afraid of something like Glimpse of Nature, or do you just immediately go after the Natural Order because that's what you think the game will eventually be about?
Yeah, Hayden's on the play again. Once again, he has Fetch Landed into Deathrite. It's a great start for the deck. He's got to hope that this time, if he plays a turn 2 Visionary, that he's not going to get killed on the next turn. There is, however, post-board, a pretty interesting Natural Order target in Hess's deck, and one that I actually think colds Hayden in this matchup. That's one Elder Scale Worm. So if you haven't played with this card, it's from M13, I believe. It's a 7/7 for 7 that is like a green worship.
Yeah, kind of like a Platinum Angel type thing.
Yeah, it's a Platinum Angel, but it's Platinum Angel, but it's green. Yes, all right, M13, got it. Okay, it's a 7/7. It has a lot of 7s on the card. It is a 7/7 for 7 that when it enters the battlefield, your life total becomes 7, and as long as you're at 7 or more, then you can't go below 7.
Right, so you can beat this card by activating Deathrite Shaman 4 times in a turn, potentially?
Actually, once it's not too bad because it only prevents damage, and I believe Deathrite is Deathrite damage or life loss?
It is life loss.
It's life loss. So actually, once Deathrite gets you below 7, you're not going to go back up to it. You don't have to activate it 4 times in a turn.
Oh, sure.
Once they're below 7, you can go to town.
That makes sense.
But if you don't, outside of Deathrite, there's not interaction. Like, I don't think Hayden has a way to beat the card.
Sure.
Yeah, so you can actually Deathrite them to 5 and then attack them for the rest of the damage, and that'll work. But back to our match, Hayden has really come out of the gates here. He had a Glimpse that turn where he made another Deathrite, an Elvish Visionary, and a Gaia's Cradle. So with that amount of card draw and now mana available to him, he's going to have a lot of powerful plays available to him. Going over to Hess's side, he has Quirion Ranger and Birch Lore Rangers, but it does not look to be the power hand he had last time.
Right. He was supposed to play a Glimpse of Nature before playing all these creatures. You know, that's what he wanted to do.
Yeah, and he also needed to have the turn 1 Deathrite to make it so that it was a combo.
Right.
But he does make some mana here. You see that forest is actually a Dryad Arbor. That's the From the Vault Realms forest that looks Dryad Arbor that looks exactly like a forest.
It's gotten me a couple times.
Yeah. All right, so Haynes has a pretty decent turn of his own. You know, he gets to have a 3rd land thanks to the turn 1 Green Sun. He has Cradle. Cradle's for 3.
4 actually, because of the Dryad Arbor.
4, thank you. And there's a little bit of a dagger here. I think he has the Elder Scale Worm in his hand. I believe he has a Natural Order, but you can't get the card in your hand. Not to mention that Hayden actually does have the Elder Scale Worm covered here, thanks to the Glimpse of Nature in his yard, plus the Deathrite and Bayou in play.
Right.
But Hayden has to, and this is not a slight. He has to know how Elder Scale Worm works. So, for example, like if you didn't play M13 Limited, which is the only format where that guy's seen play, you might the card's pretty unique in its effect. You'd have to know oh, how I beat it is I Deathrite them below 7, and then I can attack them as normal. You know, I don't think that's just obvious upon reading the card. You can puzzle your way through it and eventually get there. but like it creates this like artificial wall at 7. You know, you
Yeah.
damage can't, you go to 7 and damage can't take you below 7, but once you're below 7, then everything's fine.
So since Elder Scale Worm is basically just a soft lock in this matchup, do you feel like it's basically there to time walk?
And that's why I'm not, you know, I think it's a really neat card, and I liked it at first, but I wonder how many decks it's actually will cold, right? Like, Burn doesn't have life loss. Okay, so it's pretty good there. James Hess cast a Cabal Therapy this turn. After he used his Cradle, he used that to play Visionary. Does have Cabal Therapy. Therapy named Natural Order in Hayden's hand. Did not connect. But he did see his hand, and with these creatures in play, we could get a good flashback here. It looks like Hess is going to try to buy time until he can cast Elder Scale Worm. It is still a 7/7 Trampler, even though it's not going to lock out the game.
Yeah, and that's pretty big, especially after you shred your opponent's hand with Cabal Therapy and you have Gaia's Cradle able to cast that thing pretty easily.
Yeah, and now Hess actually took Elvish Visionary as opposed to taking Green Sun Zenith here. That means that Hayden does have a wild card in his hand. I mean, if he wanted a Visionary, he can get it again. It will cost him 1 extra. But I am interested. I would have thought the Zenith would have gotten taken.
Maybe.
Like, mana doesn't seem to be the limiting part here. We're going to go back to Hayden's turn. We see a fetch for Dryad Arbor. He's going to then use Deathrite to make mana here. With 4 creatures in play, this is a decent-sized Cradle. But he's going to go ahead and Zenith for Wirewood Symbiote. Yeah, so now thanks to the Green Sun Zenith that was left here, he can Symbiote Visionary if he wants to.
Right, all the while untapping some creatures, maybe making extra mana with the Deathrite Shaman, depending on what happens.
Right.
The Dryad Arbor has Summoning Sickness, and I think there are no more lands in the graveyard, so maybe no extra lands for Hayden, or no extra mana for Hayden this turn.
You see Wirewood Symbiote doing the best it can here, untapping Deathrite Shaman, bouncing Elvish Visionary. Hayden's going to draw another card. It's a Quirion Ranger. He has... His engine is going. He doesn't have the finisher just yet.
Yeah, this is the situation where you're just like, all right, Natural Order, you're dead.
Yeah, Natural Order, you're dead. Creator Hoof would work. But I mean, the cool part, the part which makes this powerful is that he can bounce the Visionary on his turn and James's turn. So the Visionary will draw like 2 extra cards a turn.
Right.
Because of all the mana Hayden has.
And this is where Elves starts looking pretty good, right? Where you're playing kind of like all these dinky creatures, right? But you actually have this pretty solid draw engine online.
Yeah, so if you're James here, and this is, if you're going to Elder Scale Worm, here's where James can really score the victory, right? He needs to use his Deathrite to get all the instants and sorceries out of the graveyard and then make Elder Scale Worm.
Sure, and then it gets to a point where Hayden has to draw something, and if you draw something, you probably just don't cast it. Or at least cast it when you can exile
well, if
it
Hayden
yourself.
draws something, yeah, Hayden does have 2 Deathrites, so maybe he wins the Deathrite fight. But, you know, if Hayden draws something, he'd have to draw a instant or sorcery and then exile it. And we're going to get to see this play out. Hess is going to make Elder Scale Worm. So the first thing Elder Scale Worm does is it sets Hess's life total to 7, which, okay, he 11'd himself. But that's fine. We'll read through the card one more time, because this is, when it enters the battlefield, okay, it would set it to 7 if he was under 7, but it doesn't do that because he's at 18. So he's at 18,
okay.
The first ability does nothing. The second ability is that as long as you are at 7 or more, which he is, damage that would bring you to under 7 just brings you to 7. So
now Hayden has to Deathrite him all the way below 7.
he has to somehow get James to 7. So when he deals damage, he has to do it in phases. He's going to have to knock James to 7, then Deathrite him,
right.
then deal the rest. And that's a lot of steps. So Elder Scale Worm, I mean, this is going to buy James a huge amount of turns. What it would tell me is that Hayden needs to combo him now. He probably can't just, like, he's going to have to hoof him and then untap and hoof him and then hoof him again. He's going to have to combo him twice.
Well, you can combo with the Crater Hoof, right? and then get him down to 7, and then, okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. And then Deathrite him down to 5, and then maybe it's easier to just attack him again rather than having
Right.
4 Deathrite activations.
Right. So if you want to do it in all one turn, to kill him in one turn, you're right. You would have to hoof him down to 7, and then activate 4 Deathrites.
So this is one situation where I think if Hayden had a glimpse and basically drew his deck, he could make that happen with a Birchlore Ranger, but since he doesn't have access to Birchlore Ranger, getting that much black mana in one turn is going to be difficult. So I think you are right, where he is going to have to attack James, put him to 7, Deathrite him once, and then attack him again. Because he's not going to be able to get all those Deathrite activations.
And this is one of the interesting parts, because I imagine this is a situation like how to beat an Elder Scale Worm in the mirror. It's like, odds are Hayden has not faced this situation before, and now he's on improvise mode.
Right.
Which I kind of like it when this happens in Legacy, because, you get to watch, these players who are like veterans of their deck see, okay, how do you adapt to weird stuff? Like, how do you adapt to this random mythic from M13 that does something crazy? Like,
yeah, I mean, as a person who has played a decent amount of Legacy, this is one of the appealing parts of Legacy, is being in these situations myself and just being like, okay, you did this weird thing that I wasn't expecting. Now what do I do?
Yeah. Well, he's going to start out by drawing extra cards. He's going to continue to bounce this Visionary and recast. And that is the where you want to start. If you're James, though, you know you have time. Nettle Sentinel was cast by Hayden. And he hasn't even found the first Crater Hoof, much less the second one. Not to mention, it looks like Hess, on this turn, he's going to use his own Deathrite to eat the Glimpse himself, which means the plan where Hayden hoofs him and then Deathrites him and then hoofs him again, like, Hayden has to make sure he puts some sorceries in the graveyard, too, and that he gets to eat them.
Yeah, I'm sure that won't be an issue as long as Hayden gets to go off with Glimpse. If he has just Natural Order, then it might be an issue.
Well, if he goes off with Glimpse, there's a danger, like, that while going off, if he has to tap his Deathrites, then James will snipe out sorceries from the graveyard.
Right, but once you have like your deck in your hands, you can just cast a Glimpse and eat it right away.
Yeah.
And you have 2 Deathrites, and assuming Hayden has enough black mana, which might be the choke point, right? He has 2 Deathrites and Symbiote and Quirion Ranger, which can potentially untap his Deathrites. It's just a question of whether or not he has enough black mana.
Yeah, he doesn't. I don't think he has enough black mana. And now it may not matter. James just draws Crater Hoof Behemoth. He's just going to cast that and swing, and that's good enough. He finds the Crater Hoof first, and James Hess 2-0 defeats Hayden Bedsole.
And we saw there that the Elder Scale was not a hard lock, right? But it definitely did give him a bunch of time.
Yeah, the Elder Scale Worm was good there. It's still not as good as Crater Hoof, though.
Right.
Your best card for the matchup is in the main, but a neat sideboard tech, to say the least, from James Hess.
Yeah, certainly.